Look at that little girl. Excuse me, I need you to return to your seat.
Welcome back to our channel. Today's story is about a flight that was just minutes away from disaster. The cabin lights hummed softly as the aircraft climbed through a blanket of gray cloud, leaving the city lights shrinking beneath the wings. For most passengers, this flight was meant to be ordinary, another anonymous journey stitched into the fabric of everyday life. Carry-on bags were pushed under seats, seatbelts clicked, and the low murmur of engines settled into a steady rhythm that promised safety through routine. No one expected anything more than hours of boredom and eventual relief at landing. The weather report had sounded harmless before departure, yet the sky ahead carried a quiet weight. High-altitude winds brushed the fuselage, producing a faint vibration that passed unnoticed by many. Coffee cups rattled slightly on tray tables, then grew still again. The plane leveled off, and calm seemed to return, the kind that convinces people to trust the air around them. Minutes later, a warning tone flickered in the cockpit, brief and easily dismissed, like a cough in an empty room. Instruments adjusted, numbers recalibrated, and the aircraft continued forward. Deep within the plane's systems, something had begun to drift from its expected balance, small enough to ignore, significant enough to matter later. The passengers remained unaware, suspended between destinations, believing themselves protected by metal, training, and fate. In the middle rows sat a young girl, barely noticed by those around her. She carried no uniform, no badge, nothing that suggested importance. Her posture was quiet, her movements measured, as if she listened more than she spoke. She had boarded with the rest, passed through the same gate, followed the same rules, and taken a seat assigned by chance. To the world around her, she was just another traveler. As the aircraft pushed onward, turbulence began to whisper through the cabin. Not the violent kind that throws bodies upward, but the subtle tremor that unsettles the mind. Overhead bins creaked faintly. A few passengers looked up, then down again, forcing calm. Flight attendants moved with practiced ease, offering reassurances shaped by repetition. The engines continued their steady roar, masking the growing complexity unfolding beyond the walls. Far ahead, the sky darkened. Clouds stacked like towers, heavy with unseen force. The aircraft adjusted course slightly. A gentle correction meant to avoid discomfort rather than danger. Still, the vibration deepened, a low-frequency shiver that traveled through the floor and into the bones. Some passengers closed their eyes. Others tightened their grip on armrests, silently negotiating with fear. Inside the cockpit, attention sharpened. Readings no longer aligned perfectly, though none screamed catastrophe. A minor inconsistency, a delayed response, a fluctuation that demanded monitoring. Procedures were followed, steps taken in sequence, confidence maintained. Training insisted that control remained intact, that margins still existed. The plane pressed on, committed to a path chosen minutes earlier. In the cabin, tension grew without a name. People sensed change before they understood it. Breathing patterns shifted. Conversations faded. Even the child near the window stopped tapping the glass and stared instead at the wing, watching clouds rush past like waves. The young girl in the middle rows felt it too, an imbalance that tugged at her attention, sharpening her awareness. She listened not with ears alone, but with instinct honed by moments long before this flight. Another tremor passed through the aircraft, stronger than the last. The lights flickered, recovered, then flickered again. A ripple of unease spread seat by seat. This time, no announcement followed. The absence of words carried its own message, subtle yet powerful. The idea that something might be wrong began to form, fragile but persistent. The girl shifted in her seat. Her eyes traced the ceiling panels, the aisle, the movements of those trained to remain calm. She noticed details others missed, patterns within the noise. Her heartbeat slowed rather than raced, as if clarity demanded stillness. She did not yet know what she would do. Only that remaining passive felt increasingly impossible. Outside, the clouds closed in, swallowing the horizon. The plane entered a darker world, one defined by uncertainty and motion. Inside, the ordinary veneer of travel thinned. A man whispered a prayer. A woman clutched her phone without looking at it. Fear began to find space where routine once lived. Then came the jolt. Brief, sharp, undeniable. The aircraft dipped, recovered and dipped again. enough to send a collective gasp through the cabin. Overhead signs chimed. Faces turned pale. In that moment, the truth pressed closer. This flight was no longer routine. Somewhere between training and chance, the margin was narrowing. The girl rose slightly from her seat, not fully standing, but no longer still. Her gaze fixed forward, her expression composed. Around her, panic threatened to bloom, yet she remained anchored, as if preparing for a step that would soon matter more than fear. The flight was moving towards something unseen, and time, once abundant, was beginning to thin. A distant rumble rolled through the airframe, deeper than turbulence, heavier than sound. It felt structural, intimate, as though the plane itself were clearing its throat before speaking. The cabin fell into a strange half-silence, broken only by the engines and the uneven cadence of breath. Every second stretched, elastic and fragile. Systems continued to work. Lights remained on and altitude held. Yet the sense of borrowed time grew sharper, pressing against the edges of thought. The girl steadied herself, fingers brushing the seat back ahead. She absorbed the atmosphere, the fear, the hope, the waiting. This was not bravery born of spectacle, but of recognition. She sensed that moments like this did not announce themselves loudly. They arrived quietly, demanding attention without permission. Around her, the aircraft carried hundreds of lives, each unaware of how close uncertainty had drawn. Another vibration passed, followed by a faint metallic echo somewhere beyond the cabin walls. Eyes widened, hands tightened. The path ahead was narrowing, and decisions would soon matter. The girl inhaled, preparing to rise fully, as if responding to a call she could hear. The flight was measured in minutes. The next few minutes stretched unnaturally, as if time itself had slowed to observe what would happen next. The aircraft continued forward, but its movement felt strained, like a body pushing through resistance it had not expected. The engines maintained their roar, yet beneath the sound lay a subtle unevenness, a faint discord that only some could sense. Most passengers sat frozen, caught between hope and fear, unsure which emotion deserved more space. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated, its quiet authority demanding stillness. Yet stillness had become difficult. The cabin no longer felt like a sealed promise of safety, but a shared space of anticipation. Every vibration carried meaning now. Every sound invited interpretation. People searched the faces of the crew, trying to read confidence or concern in eyes trained to reveal neither. Another tremor rippled through the plane, longer this time, less forgiving. The floor seemed to ripple beneath shoes and bags. A few gasps escaped despite attempts at composure. Somewhere in the back, a child began to cry, the sound thin and sharp, cutting through the hum of engines. The cry was quickly hushed, but its echo lingered. In the cockpit, concentration tightened further. Numbers changed faster now, margins compressing with each adjustment. Procedures that once felt routine demanded full attention. Communication shortened, stripped of excess. Every decision carried weight, each second measured against fuel, altitude, and weather. Control still existed, but it required constant negotiation. The cabin lights flickered again, longer than before. A collective inhale followed, then silence. No announcement came. The absence felt heavier now, filling the space between breaths. Passengers shifted, some gripping armrests, others closing their eyes as if darkness might shield them from what they could not see. Faith, logic, and fear collided quietly within each person. The girl stood up. At first, her movement went unnoticed, lost in the sea of tension. She rose slowly, deliberately, respecting the instability of the floor beneath her. When the plane lurched again, she adjusted her stance without panic, feet finding balance as if she had rehearsed this moment in her mind long before it arrived. A few nearby passengers looked up, startled less by her defiance of the seatbelt sign than by her calm. She did not rush. She did not speak. Her eyes moved with purpose, scanning the aisle, the ceiling, the rhythm of the aircraft itself. To some, her presence felt intrusive, even reckless. To others, it felt grounding, a small point of certainty in a cabin drowning in questions. A flight attendant noticed her and stiffened, training instinctively asserting itself. A gesture followed, firm but controlled, signaling her to sit. The girl met the attendant's eyes, not with challenge, but with urgency. There was no drama in her expression, only resolve shaped by understanding. For a brief second, the world narrowed to that exchange, two paths of responsibility intersecting. Another jolt shook the aircraft stronger than any before. The overhead bins rattled loudly. A metallic clatter echoed somewhere deep within the plane's body, sharp enough to silence even the engines in the minds of those who heard it. Fear surged. No longer subtle, no longer patient. A wave of panic threatened to crest. The girl steadied herself against a seat back. She felt the shift before it fully registered. A change in motion that suggested imbalance, not collapse, but drift, the kind that could grow worse if ignored. Her breathing remained controlled, her focus narrowing to essentials. She knew moments like this demanded action before permission. Around her, whispers erupted. Someone called out for help. Someone else demanded answers. The order of the cabin fractured, replaced by overlapping anxieties. The flight attendant hesitated, torn between protocol and the undeniable reality unfolding around them. Training did not cover every possibility, especially not the presence of a calm stranger standing when everyone else was told to sit. The girl took a step forward into the aisle. This time, more eyes followed her. She moved not toward the exits or the windows, but forward, toward the heart of the aircraft. Her hand brushed the overhead rail, fingers light, testing stability. The plane shuddered again, then leveled slightly, as if responding to unseen corrections. In the cockpit, alerts layered over one another. Not yet catastrophic, but insistent. The aircraft demanded attention from every angle. Outside, clouds pressed close, heavy and indifferent. Inside, responsibility weighed heavily on those tasked with control. They worked through procedures, but uncertainty crept in, thin and sharp. Back in the cabin, the girl paused. She listened. Not to voices, but to the plane itself, the subtle language of motion and sound. She felt the rhythm shift again, a delayed response following turbulence. Her expression tightened, not with fear, but with concern. This was not something that would resolve on its own. A man near the aisle reached out, touching her arm briefly as if to pull her back to safety. She looked at him, gently removing his hand, offering a look that asked for trust without explanation. The man withdrew, unsettled yet strangely reassured. The flight attendant approached again, closer this time, voice raised to be heard over the engines. Words formed, but before they could land, the aircraft dipped sharply. A scream broke free somewhere near the back. The girl braced, knees bending, absorbing the motion with practiced ease. When the plane recovered, she remained standing. The cabin erupted into noise. Fear had found its voice. People cried openly now, prayers spoken aloud without shame. The sense of anonymity dissolved, replaced by collective vulnerability. Hundreds of lives, bound together by altitude and uncertainty, waited for something to change. The girl raised her head, eyes fixed forward. She knew the time for waiting was over. Whatever knowledge guided her, whatever instinct had sharpened her awareness, it now demanded commitment. Remaining silent felt like surrender. Remaining seated felt impossible. Another deep vibration coursed through the plane, followed by a momentary drop that stole breath from lungs. The engines surged in response, loud and strained. The margins were shrinking. Somewhere between sky and ground, the future balanced precariously. She took another step forward. This time the aisle cleared slightly, bodies instinctively leaning away, making space. Not because they understood her purpose, but because something about her certainty cut through the chaos. Even fear recognized resolve when it appeared. The cockpit door remained closed, sealed against intrusion and danger, yet beyond it lay the center of control, the place where decisions would soon determine outcomes. The girl stopped several rows short, aware of boundaries both physical and invisible. She did not need to cross them yet. First, she needed to be seen. The aircraft shuddered again, longer, heavier. The lights dimmed, then stabilized. A collective gasp filled the cabin. Time pressed closer, urgency thickening the air. The flight was no longer measured in hours or even minutes, but in moments. The girl stood firm in the aisle, her presence now undeniable. She drew a slow breath, preparing to speak, to act, to bridge the gap between knowledge and authority. The disaster was no longer distant. It was approaching steadily, relentlessly. And for the first time since the turbulence began, the future shifted, not because of a system or a procedure, but because one person had chosen to stand. The aircraft felt different now, as if it were carrying a secret too heavy to hide. Every vibration traveled deeper, no longer just noise, but information, telling a story of strain and resistance. The cabin had crossed an invisible threshold where fear stopped being abstract and became physical. Hearts pounded harder. Breaths shortened. Time compressed into a narrow corridor of seconds. The girl remained standing. Her presence in the aisle had changed the atmosphere. Panic still existed, but it had been disrupted, forced to share space with focus. People watched her unconsciously, as if her steadiness offered a reference point in a world that had lost balance. She was no hero in posture, no dramatic figure demanding attention. She was simply there, unwavering. Another deep shudder rolled through the aircraft. This one lingered, a prolonged vibration that rattled seat frames and sent a low groan through the fuselage. The sound felt structural, intimate, as though the plane itself were under stress. Several passengers cried out. Others pressed their foreheads against seat backs, eyes shut tight, surrendering to whatever came next. In the cockpit, the situation tightened further. Indicators drifted closer to limits designed never to be touched. Corrections came faster now, layered and precise, each one buying seconds. Outside, the storm refused to loosen its grip. Inside, control demanded relentless attention. There was no room for error, no space for hesitation. Back in the cabin, the girl adjusted her stance again, compensating for the aircraft's uneven motion. She felt the pattern clearly now. The turbulence was no longer random. There was a rhythm to it, an escalation followed by delayed stabilization. Something was lagging, responding too slowly to commands meant to keep the plane balanced. It was subtle but dangerous. Her eyes moved to the wings, visible through the windows as shadows against the clouded sky. The angle felt wrong, only slightly, but enough to matter. She absorbed the detail, connecting it with the sensations under her feet. Her mind worked quietly, assembling fragments into meaning. The flight attendants struggled to restore order. Moving carefully, voices raised but controlled. Training guided them, yet the situation stretched beyond rehearsed calm. The girl's continued presence in the aisle complicated everything. Protocol demanded she sit. Reality suggested something else entirely. Another violent jolt struck without warning. This one sent loose items shifting, bags thumping against seat legs, heads snapping forward. A scream tore through the cabin, raw and unfiltered. The plane dropped sharply, long enough for stomachs to lift and hope to falter. For a brief, terrifying moment, the aircraft did not immediately recover. Then the engines surged, roaring louder, pushing back against gravity. The plane leveled unevenly, climbing just enough to avoid freefall. The recovery was rough, imperfect. The margin had narrowed again. The girl braced herself fully now, one hand gripping a seat back, the other steadying against the overhead rail. Her expression tightened, not with fear, but with urgency. This was no longer a situation that could wait for gradual response. Whatever imbalance existed was growing faster than the system could correct. Around her, passengers cried openly. Tears streamed without shame. Prayers overlapped in different languages, spoken aloud as if volume might reach the sky. The anonymity of travel had dissolved completely. Every life felt exposed, fragile, bound together by the thin shell of the aircraft. The girl looked forward again, toward the sealed cockpit door. She understood the boundaries that separated authority from passengers. She also understood that boundaries existed to serve safety, not delay it. Her breathing slowed, her thoughts sharpening further. She knew that whatever she did next would challenge expectations, possibly anger those trained to enforce order. But hesitation carried greater risk. The aircraft shuddered once more, followed by a sharp metallic echo from somewhere near the wing. It was brief but distinct, like stress released under pressure. The sound sent a new wave of fear through the cabin. Even those who had clung to hope felt it slip slightly from their grasp. The lights dimmed again, longer this time, bathing the cabin in a dull, uncertain glow. Emergency systems did not engage, but the fluctuation was enough to signal strain. A collective gasp followed, then silence, heavy and suffocating. The girl took another step forward. This time, the movement felt final, deliberate. The aisle opened instinctively. People leaned back, some reaching out as if to stop her, others pulling their hands away, unsure whether to interfere. She moved past them with calm inevitability, her focus locked ahead. In the cockpit, the crew worked relentlessly, unaware of the precise shape fear had taken behind them. Their world was instruments and procedures, alarms and calculations. They did not yet see the girl, did not yet know that something unexpected was approaching from the cabin side of the door. Another drop followed, shorter but sharper. The aircraft responded sluggishly, correcting just a fraction too late. The pattern repeated, confirming what the girl already sensed. Delay, lag, a system fighting to keep up with conditions. It was no longer fully matching. She stopped again, close enough now that the cockpit door dominated her field of vision. She did not touch it. She did not knock. She waited, listening, feeling the vibrations through the floor, the walls, the air. This was the center of decision, the place where seconds could be traded for survival or lost forever. Behind her, the cabin teetered on the edge of chaos. Some passengers had surrendered to despair, heads bowed, shoulders shaking. Others stared forward, eyes wide, watching the girl as if she were the last variable left in an equation gone wrong. No one knew what she would do. No one knew if it would matter. The aircraft lurched again, more violently than before. The nose dipped, held for a heartbeat too long, then rose abruptly. Loose items flew. The scream that followed was collective, instinctive, unstoppable. This time, recovery came slower, the climb uneven and strained. The engine sounded different now, louder, harsher, as if pushed beyond comfort. The plane protested with groans and vibrations, its limits nearing. The sky outside remained merciless, clouds pressing close, offering no escape. The girl closed her eyes briefly, not in fear, but in focus. When she opened them, her expression had hardened into resolve. The moment had arrived. Waiting longer would only narrow options further. She shifted her weight, grounding herself against the movement of the aircraft. Her hand lifted slightly, hovering near the cockpit door, not yet making contact. The boundary between passenger and control had never felt thinner. Another warning tremor rolled through the fuselage, deeper than before, carrying the unmistakable weight of escalation. Time fractured into fragments. Every second now mattered more than the last. The girl stood ready, poised between action and consequence. Behind her, hundreds of lives waited, unknowingly balanced on what she would do next. Ahead of her, control and uncertainty collided. The flight was no longer merely close to disaster. It was brushing against it. The aircraft shook again, not violently, but with a weight that felt final, like a warning delivered too late. The airframe groaned under pressure, vibrations stacking atop one another until they blurred into a single, relentless force. Inside the cabin, fear had reached its limit. There was no room left for denial, no comfort in routine. Everyone felt it now. The flight was balanced on the edge. The girl did not step back. She placed her hand firmly against the cockpit door, not to force it open, but to ground herself against the truth of the moment. The metal was cold, steady, separating chaos from control. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the rhythm of the aircraft flow through her body, aligning instinct with motion. This was not about authority. It was about timing. Another dip came, sharper than before. The plane corrected late again, lagging just enough to steal breath and hope in equal measure. The engine surged, strained, their sound no longer reassuring but desperate. Somewhere deep within the aircraft, systems fought to compensate, calculations chasing conditions that refused to stabilize. The girl pressed the call panel. The aircraft shook again, not violently, but with a weight that felt final, like a warning delivered too late. The airframe groaned under pressure, vibrations stacking atop one another until they blurred into a single, relentless force. Inside the cabin, fear had reached its limit. There was no room left for denial, no comfort in routine. Everyone felt it now. The flight was balanced on the edge. The girl did not step back. She placed her hand firmly against the cockpit door, not to force it open, but to ground herself against the truth of the moment. The metal was cold, steady, separating chaos from control. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the rhythm of the aircraft flow through her body, aligning instinct with motion. This was not about authority. It was about timing. Another dip came, sharper than before. The plane corrected late again, lagging just enough to steal breath and hope in equal measure. The engine surged, strained, their sound no longer reassuring but desperate. Somewhere deep within the aircraft, systems fought to compensate, calculations chasing conditions that refused to stabilize. The girl pressed the call panel. Inside the cockpit, awareness shifted instantly. A signal from the cabin at this moment meant urgency, not inconvenience. Attention flickered, brief but decisive. Beyond the door, trained minds recalibrated, sensing that the situation had crossed another invisible line. The turbulence eased for half a second, just long enough for silence to fall. Hundreds of passengers froze in that fragile pause, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Some clutched hands together. Others stared forward, eyes locked on the girl, their fear redirected into expectation. The door opened. The cockpit revealed a space dense with focus, instruments alive with movement, warning lights glowing against controlled chaos. The pilots turned, surprise cutting through their concentration. They took in the sight quickly. A young girl, steady, unshaken, standing where protocol said she should not be. She did not hesitate. She did not waste time on explanations. She pointed, gestured, guided attention to patterns already half recognized but not yet connected. Her movements were precise, economical, born of clarity rather than panic. She communicated not with authority but with certainty. Outside, the storm pressed closer. Inside, something shifted. The pilots absorbed what she showed them, not as an intrusion, but as an unexpected alignment. Pieces fell into place. The delayed responses, the uneven corrections, the subtle lag she had felt beneath her feet now made sense on their screens. A secondary system, still functioning but no longer synchronized, was fighting primary control at critical moments. Time tightened again, but this time it sharpened focus instead of fear. Adjustments followed, deliberate and bold. Procedures changed. Systems were isolated, others reinforced. The aircraft responded differently now, not instantly, but decisively. The next tremor came, but the correction followed sooner, cleaner. The plane shuddered, then steadied just a fraction longer than before. In the cabin, passengers felt it before they understood it. The motion changed. Not smooth, not calm, but purposeful. The aircraft was no longer drifting blindly. It was being guided with intent. Another surge of turbulence struck, heavy and loud. This time the plane held. It dipped, corrected, and stabilized more quickly. Gasps rippled through the cabin, this time edged with disbelief rather than despair. Tears still fell, but hope slipped back into the space fear had occupied. The girl remained in the cockpit doorway, braced, focused. Her role was not to command, but to confirm, to watch for the rhythm she understood so well. Each response came closer to alignment. Each correction bought more space, more time. Clouds thinned ahead, darkness giving way to lighter gray. The storm did not release them fully, but its grip weakened. The aircraft climbed slightly, engines still strained but no longer screaming. Warnings quieted, not gone but subdued. Minutes passed. Real minutes this time, no longer compressed into terror. The flight attendants resumed movement, slower, cautious, but steadier. In the cabin, breathing eased. Some passengers laughed softly through tears. Others simply closed their eyes, exhausted by fear. The girl stepped back. Her part was finished. The aircraft no longer spoke in crisis, but in effort. Control had returned, imperfect but real. The pilots continued their work, hands steady now, minds clear. The cockpit door closed again, sealing authority where it belonged. In the cabin, she returned to her seat without ceremony. No applause followed. No one spoke. The magnitude of what had just passed through them was too heavy for sound. She sat quietly, hands folded, posture calm, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The flight diverted, choosing safety over schedule. The descent was tense but controlled. Every movement carried memory but no longer fear. When the wheels finally met the runway, the impact felt firm, undeniable, real. Then came the sound no one had dared imagine minutes earlier. Applause. It started hesitantly, scattered, then grew, swelling until the cabin filled with it. Hands clapped, voices broke, relief poured out without restraint. Some cried openly now, not from fear but from survival. Lives continued, futures resumed, because a disaster had been interrupted. The girl remained seated. She did not look around for recognition. She did not smile for attention. Her gaze rested forward, calm and distant, as if already letting the moment pass. What mattered had already happened. The plane was on the ground. Everyone was alive. As passengers disembarked later, some glanced at her, uncertain, grateful, searching for words. None came. None were needed. Hope had already spoken louder than anything else. The flight would be remembered by those on board for the rest of their lives, not as a story of terror, but as a reminder that sometimes salvation does not arrive with sirens or uniforms. Sometimes it stands up quietly in the aisle, listens carefully, and acts when time runs thin. The flight had been minutes from disaster. And because one girl stood up, it became a story of survival.